All right.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Town of McCandless, February 8th, 2021 meeting of Town Council. Councilmember Smith will be leading us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right, let's have a good, quick meeting. And now that Tom Brady has a ring for each of us, let's hope we are as successful as he is in accomplishing our goals. Ready? Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
One
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a couple of announcements this evening. If you haven't already and you're interested, please sign up for the overpopulation of the whitetail deer in the North Hills panel discussion, which is, you can sign up on our website, which will be February the 16th at 7 o'clock. Also, our Comcast cable channel is up and running. What is that number?
98.
98. Okay, so that's channel 98 on Comcast. If you want to check out what we're doing. I'd like to also remind everyone, I try to go back and find things that maybe people have forgotten about that we've been doing for a little while, and this is one of those things. I want to remind everyone that McCandless has a safe exchange zone, which is around the back of the town building, right in front of the police department. It is under camera surveillance, and if you are selling anything online or just need a public place, a safe public place to exchange, let you know that that is available to you. Also, our new Instagram account is up and active. So what are they called? Instagrammers? Nobody knows. Okay, all of you Instagram people can get on Instagram now and do,
Instagrammers will do.
you can do Instagramming. Okay. Also, I'd like to encourage everyone who hasn't logged on to McCandless and Me to do so. There is a lot of good information on there. The most frequently asked questions about the oil and gas ordinance is on there. There's some deer information on there. There's also some you can spot where you see deer, and a lot of good town information. So that's a good source for you. Last but not least, the North Allegheny Women's Association is collecting food for the North Hills Community Outreach for the next 2 weeks. You can make those donations at the town hall, the front door, right inside the first glass doors. There's a big box there, and this is all non-perishable items. So that will be going on for the next 2 weeks. So please do what you can. It's called Share the Love here around Valentine's Day. That's all the announcements that I have. Is there a motion to approve the minutes that were submitted to council?
So moved.
All right, that's Councilmember Woods. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Councilmember Clunan. Were there any questions about the minutes or corrections or additions that needed to be made? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes and the minutes are accepted. So our first I see. Below this was what was the date of the minutes that we just passed. I'm sorry, that was a little confusing. Next is a public hearing on tentatively identified ordinance number 1512, authorizing the renewal of the cable franchise agreement negotiated by the North Hills Council of Governments between the town and Verizon Pennsylvania LLC. Bob, do you want to you have a little thing on this?
I think that his connection may have dropped on his computer, but I'm going to see if maybe Trisha happens to be at the office. Let me give that a
Okay.
shot.
Okay, yeah,
I'm
I
here.
just got a message about a goofy computer too.
Yeah, I'm here on Trish's computer.
Do you want me to turn the camera on?
If you'd like.
It's usually better for the recording.
Okay. Sorry about that. Everyone froze just before the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's the sign.
The North Hills COG with Cohen Law Group negotiated a franchise agreement with Verizon Cable, Verizon in Pennsylvania, similar to what they had done with Comcast. And they, I just wanted to give you a summary of some of the items in the proposal. The franchise fee is set up to be a maximum of 5%, although McCandless's is currently at 3%. So we do have the ability to bump that up at some point if we chose to do so. The agreement also is including 22 various revenue sources that Verizon can charge its customers. And that includes 2 new sources that aren't in the current agreement. Those sources are regional sports programming fees and revenues from the sale of subscriber lists. The agreement gives the town the right to perform a franchise fee audit of Verizon if we so choose. And it's subject to a 4-year look back period. And Verizon is required to pay 6% interest on any underpayments that they may have made to the town. The new agreement also includes a stronger bundled services protection, which essentially is outlined is in such a way as that if Verizon sells a bundled service to a customer, that Verizon must spread those savings out over all of the services they provide, not solely apply that savings to the cable service. There's a provision in the agreement for termination of the agreement. Verizon is required to provide a 6 or a 12-month notice of its intent to terminate the agreement, and can do so if they are in a situation where they have at least 6% subscriber loss over a 12-month period. That has not occurred up to this point, so we would not have to deal with that provision at this point. There's a series of customer standards that are outlined. They follow the FCC recommendations, but in order for them to be enforceable by the municipality, they have to be included in the cable franchise agreement. These customer service standards include telephone answering time limits for commencing installation, for service interruption and repair work, a 4-hour appointment window for service calls. Credits are available for service interruptions of 4 or more hours. Requirements that the bills be clear and fully itemized for the customer to review. And there are customer complaint procedures and timeframes built into the agreement as well. Like the Comcast agreement, there is, based on the new FCC orders, provision that any in-kind services that may have been received by the municipality are now can be incorporated into the franchise fee amount of money that is paid by by Verizon. And so that cost would be offset. Lastly, there are liquidated damages set up for the contract, 8 different categories, bumping up some of the new liquidated damages from $150 a day to $150 a day from 100. Violations of customer service standards at a rate of $450 per quarter, up from 300, and overall liquidated damages in the course of a year from 15,000 or to 15,000 from 12,000. In a nutshell, that is the changes in the agreement. Otherwise, the other important provision is this is a 5-year agreement as opposed to Comcast, which was a 10-year agreement. Any questions on any of that, Dave?
Couple questions. The first was, I think if I understood how it works now correctly, the in-kind services they do not apply towards the franchise fee until the franchise fee plus the in-kind services value hits that 5%, right? So I think you said that right now we're at 3%. I believe the way it is that the in-kind services do not count towards that 3% because we're not hitting that 5% threshold yet. Is my understanding on that right?
Not quite. The value of the in-kind service, and I'll just use a simple analogy. If we have basic service for the town, and that is $10 a month, that $10 a month can be deducted or incorporated into that franchise fee. So if our franchise fee was $100 and we chose to keep the in-kind service, we get a check for 90 plus the in-kind service of 10.
Okay. And so how it's set up right now, I think you said right now the franchise fee is 3%, even though under the contract we could go up to 5%.
Correct.
And so the in-kind service, right now, the in-kind service wouldn't reduce what we get in terms of money for the franchise fee because the franchise fee is 3%, or is it structured right now that it does reduce that 3%?
It would reduce it. If we, so we would have a choice of having the franchise fee reduced or paying the bill separately. In this case, we're not, I don't think we have to worry about that for this service, but that provision is in there like it is for Comcast.
And then the second question I had was, is there, how did we land on 3% as opposed to the 5%?
That was a decision made by a previous council. I think probably in large part since that franchise fee is passed on to the customer, I believe it was in an effort to keep the cost of the customer to a minimum. Still receive revenue, but keep the cost of the customer to a minimum.
Okay, so that's a fee that they can pass on directly to the customer. Okay.
They don't, it's not a possible to pass on. It's
They
an
do
absolute
It will be passed on.
Right,
Okay.
Yes.
right. And I also think that since we agreed to 3% on Comcast, we need to be consistent and fair and keep a 3% on this company also.
Okay, and the only thing I'd bring up with that then, that makes sense to me. But then it looks like we have the leeway to tack on that the in-kind service then, because then the total value of the franchise fee plus the in-kind service is still under that 5%. And so and I wouldn't imagine that that's a cost that could get passed on to the consumer.
Do we have any in-kind services from Verizon, Bob?
Not at the moment.
No,
No, so,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's, the point is moot. There,
Yeah.
we don't have any.
Okay,
Okay.
didn't realize that.
Yeah, we don't have any.
any other, Shelley, you had a question.
Actually, this conversation solved it. I wanted to simply state for the benefit of the public who is watching or will watch that McCandless is only assessing the franchise fee at 3% versus the ability to charge it at 5%. And that actually is a benefit to our residents. We're taking less, and so they get charged less. So that was my point.
Very good.
Thumbs up from me on that.
Any other questions?
RJ, do you have any, anyone signed up from the public that would like to make a comment on the franchise fee?
I do not.
Okay. All right, one last call for council. Any questions or comments about this contract? Okay, all right. Hearing none, then I close the public hearing. The next order of business is public comment on agenda items or general public, general comments on anything. So this is open public comment. So if you have not already, please put your name, your address, and I guess you don't have to put the subject that you want to talk about, since it's general comment, unless you just want to. And I'm sure we have several of those. So let's get
Yeah.
started.
I've got one signed up so far. And again, folks, if you were meaning to sign up and missed it for some reason at this point in the meeting, feel free to type away while I cue Mary Ann Love. And there you are.
Okay. I started my video. Am I on?
You're on.
Okay, I would like to, just a brief comment. I see the oil and gas ordinances are up for a possible vote. So as I stated during the public comments at the last council meeting, a lot of people have spent a lot of time, a lot of safeguards to these proposed ordinances. And it's very important that these safeguards pass, in my opinion. The proposed ordinances are perfect. Unfortunately, nothing in life is perfect. I had hoped that the drilling could be contained in the one industrial zone in McCandless that they were forced to create by the state for marijuana. But apparently that area doesn't have enough space for the protective distances wanted to protect abutting properties from drilling. Most of us, if not all, probably prefer no drilling in North Park. And while these ordinances also don't do that, they do immediately provide huge safeguards if a company made a drilling request. Safeguards that we don't have now, and safeguards that we won't have if these ordinances aren't passed. These ordinances provide interim protection until hopefully council can take, I'm hoping, some additional steps. I was really happy to see that on tonight's agenda under zoning, it says authorization to solicit requests for proposals from qualified firms to prepare an updated zoning ordinance and map for the town. I'm hoping that that will include quote unquote additional steps that I mentioned above. For now, are we better protected without these ordinances? In my opinion, no. Are we better protected with these ordinances? In my opinion, yes. Oftentimes, steps are needed to get to an optimal outcome. Passing these ordinances are a good first step. Without them, we are unnecessarily very vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. We have someone else?
So, well, I have someone that's a Franklin Park resident requesting to speak.
Our meeting bylaws are pretty clear on that. They are certainly welcome to write to council and send an email to everyone, but only taxpayers and residents of McCandless are allowed to speak at meetings unless they're like representative council. I'm sorry.
I do not have anyone else signed in that case.
Okay. Okay. All right, I wasn't ready for that. Okay, then we will close the public comment session and we will move on to, oh, I did want to remind everyone that if you have any written public comments that you would like to send to the town or to individual council members, please feel free to do that. You have 10 days after the public hearing to get those comments in. If you have anything in addition about the cable franchise for us to consider before we vote on that. And as many of you know, I see many names here that people who have sent emails to us and who've sent, who have called us, and we thank you for all of your comments and all of your emails and letters that you have sent. And we see every one of those. We read every one of them. Everyone that comes to the town is forwarded to each council member. So just remember, if you're not inclined to speak in public or just kind of freaked out with the whole Zoom thing, everything that you send to us, we do get and we do read. So I wanted to say that right here before we moved on also. Okay, so let's go on now to the finance and personnel committee.
Yep. We have 2 items tonight, Madam President. First one is to review checklisting number 1, dated January 1st, 2021 through January 31st, 2021, totaling $856,424.22. as submitted to each member of council and posted on the bulletin board and town website. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions for Tricia.
Available for any questions that you might have on tonight's checklist.
Seeing none. Okay. Second item, to review the monthly financial summary and dashboard report that was included in your packet online. Tricia?
If anyone has any questions regarding tonight's report, please let me know. I'm available to answer any questions. We're still reporting on December of 2020. We'll begin in 2021 next month. January is just it looks pretty sad still because we have so few revenues in January. But we are still wrapping up 2020. And we'll, like I said, move on to 2021 in at the next month's meeting.
Okay. Anybody have anything in particular for Tricia?
Mike,
David?
couple questions on the on the dashboard summary. Just going down to the revenues. I just wanted to look at there were 3, that were bigger dollar number items where the percentages were lower, the licenses and permits, local funding, and the charges and fees. Is that all stuff that essentially can be attributed to COVID, or lagging revenues coming in?
Yes, so most of that, those items are related to the shutdown, and they have corresponding expenditures that are also reduced for that time period.
Okay,
So, yeah, those should rebound in the coming year.
okay, thank you.
David, an example of that would be the police services that would normally have been purchased, if you will, from the theater at McCandless Crossing. Police officers would work details on the weekends so that we lose that revenue, but on the other side of it, we're not paying out the overtime for those details.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Thank you.
I have a question.
Trish? Yeah.
Just curious, Tricia, if the recent weather events have been accounted for and if we would see a big impact. I'm not a meteorologist, but it seems like we're having more snow this year than we have in the past. I'm not sure if that will have any impact moving forward with wrapping up the December, January.
We have experienced additional overtime for Public Works Department individuals. They have different alternatives depending on how many hours they're called out. I will report on the amounts of overtime that has been occurred in the first 2 months of this year and next month. But yes, we are seeing more than we saw last year. Definitely. I mean, it's considerable.
That's what I had a feeling of that, but I don't have the exact inches or anything, but thank you.
Yeah, I think we've reached our average already for the snow for the year, and budgetarily, we're going to be using up all of our materials budget at this point from the looks of it.
All of our salt?
We will be buying all of the salt that we anticipated buying.
Okay, because we've had salt for years piling up. I just wondered.
We used a lot of that in December with those snows that we got.
Anybody else have any questions? Nope. Okay, that concludes my report.
All right, zoning committee. We have, you have the report. We will have a couple of things coming up for council's approval on the 22nd. And we'll discuss those things there. If you have any questions just burning that you need to ask now, you certainly can do that. Number 2, authorization to solicit requests for proposals from qualified firms to prepare an updated zoning ordinance and map for the town. RJ, would you like to tell us a little bit about this?
Oh, I would love to. So I think this is something that, individually, you've all probably heard me talk about in sort of general terms. It was something that was part of the budget request to get started on this process to update our zoning ordinance. And so one may wonder, well, what exactly goes into that? Because every time that we do a zoning amendment, that is theoretically updating the zoning ordinance. But this one's a little more involved and I think a little more fun at the end of the day, or maybe that's just me. But so to kind of just put it in really black and white terms, I think the last time that we had a really major reworking of the structure of our zoning ordinance was in the late 1970s. So if you think about the way that some things were in the world in the 1970s, one might say that they're a bit different now. And perhaps thinking in some different ways is warranted. As far as I understand, there were a few districts that were added, such as the development district in the 80s, the RC district in the early mid 90s. And somewhere in the 90s, there was also, sort of a sprucing up, from what I understand, where, there were quite a few amendments here and there. But again, the overall structure remained the same as it was put in place shortly after we did the town charter. Again, you know, the way that the world looks is very different now. You know, and that's not saying that there's necessarily anything that was ever wrong with our zoning, or you know, that this is just something that needs to be done to bring us into the 21st century, I think. So what goes into a zoning ordinance update, and what is the motion on the agenda tonight is to authorize us to look for a planning firm to assist us in doing this. You know, one person can't rewrite a zoning ordinance alone. It's already, I'm getting some feedback here from one of us. Okay, sounds like it stopped, so I'm gonna keep rolling with it. So anyway, a planning firm, somebody that can kind of do the data crunching with us, take a really big, you know, zoomed out look at, okay, how do all the pieces fit together? How do we make sure that when we change this one section, you know, to update things to be a little more modern, we don't break another section over here? All of that stuff is something that really can't be done by a single person. And it's good to sort of get, you know, an outside perspective to sort of make sure that, you know, when you look at something every day, or when you live it, you know, for years, sometimes you just don't see things in the same way as somebody that can come and give you sort of an outside perspective and get a better result when you combine the way that you see things. So I think that it's worth taking a look, if we will join me in my screen share for a moment, at what we've got right now with the zoning ordinance and the map. It's a whole lot of colors. It's a beautiful Crayola box, right? But sometimes when you look at that, you know, it's kind of hard to see exactly what the character is of the different areas of town. You know, each of those colors represents a little box of uses. Sometimes there are uses that can be in multiple different boxes, you might say. All of the districts, I know it's tiny writing, but all the districts that are labeled C are our core commercial districts. There's also the institutional district, which of course has been a really big topic of discussion through some of the different uses, you know, the oil and gas amendment. There's also the RC district, which is the bright red, the D development district, which is the brown. I think that might be all of our specially named commercial districts, perhaps. And then we've got another 6 residential districts. That's a lot. And, you know, I think we kind of ran out of colors at some point, and that's why everything isn't quite in the same different, you know, the same color buckets for different type of uses. But, you know, overall, I think it's been a result of kind of trying to make it work over the years. You know, there are a lot of reasons that it's scary to take the plunge, but if we do, by authorizing this motion, this is just perhaps an example, by no means work that's already done, but an example of what things might look like. So essentially what this map is it's not necessarily a proposed zoning map. It's not necessarily exactly proposed districts. And, you know, this is kind of just me messing around with it. So don't focus too much on the individual parcels. What I really want to bring into, you know, contrast with the previous map is you can tell a little bit more when you're looking at things. What are the characters of the different area of the town? The R2, you know, that I was not about to recolor every single parcel in that district. So we kept the light blue color there. Townhomes, again, same thing. But looking at the commercial areas, you can really break them down into 3 or 4 big categories of, you know, sort of a lifestyle, more mixed use development. McCandless Crossing is a great example of that, sort of a commercial area that has an internal neighborhood almost within it. We have a lot of transitional zones where commercial fades very quickly into residential. The RC district has tried to capture that, you know, over the years, but there are a lot of other areas in town that actually function really similarly. But because they are all different colors, it's kind of hard to see that sometimes. So I think something that really stands out to me, just in this thought exercise of sort of the existing uses, you know, these areas that are different shades of purple, they're already some type of commercial, whether it's low impact, like a hospital or a school, or sort of that more dynamic mixed use type. You really get a better picture of, you know, when you look at this map, it's kind of hard to see what stands out. There's just one big property that dominates the map, and you know, we're thrilled that it's here. It's wonderful. It's an asset for the community and for a lot of other people in the county and all around. But it's kind of hard to see where the McCandless part of McCandless is, right? So when you look at that, it's a little more clear, you know, sort of narrowing down the commercial districts and really getting to the heart of what's going on in these different areas. You can see a little bit more of the character of the town on its own. You know, there's some really cool stuff that we have going on here. And I think that overall, updating the map, making it a little easier to make cool stuff happen, and also make sure that our residential neighborhoods are protected. This is something that's just a crucial tool. So overall, what we're trying to do with this whole thing is change how we think about zoning, right? Historically, it's kind of been, okay, where can we restrict things? Where do we want to keep this one particular use to this one spot in town? And that's really tough because things change a lot year to year, and there are barriers to, you know, exciting things happening when properties maybe, you know, fall out of use and can be brought up to speed, brought up into a more modern use. It's really hard to do that when everything is kind of siloed into different districts. So, you know, zoning now in the 2020s, I suppose, since we're officially in it, we've made it through that first year, the 2020s. It's really more about what's your vision for where the community can go in the future than restricting what a community or an individual property owner can do with a parcel. It's about being flexible, because we all certainly know that life can change really fast. You know, a lot of questions that we get lately are about somebody wanting to work from home and essentially what's, you know, a really fancy backyard shed, accessory dwelling units. You know, sometimes people in other communities might, you know, use that, have a bedroom out there for an in-law. You know, those are some really common things where, you know, communities that are not particularly dense compared to some of the urban core are still finding reasons that they want to be more flexible for residents, as well as for commercial uses as things change, because you can't think of everything and put it down on a list, you know, in one moment in time and have everything set for decades without a couple hiccups. Another really important thing that we want to think about in this is, you know, changing sort of the culture from a reactive way to deal with zoning questions or, you know, different plans that come in where you see something, you go, oh no, I hadn't thought of that. You know, we have to either make an amendment to the code to make something cool happen, or, you know, maybe something we hadn't thought of comes out of the blue and the code isn't ready to respond to it because it's, you know, quite a few decades old overall. You really want to think about it more of how can we allow this space to transform into something cool, or how can we make sure that our zoning regulations, you know, protect the spaces that we want to stay the way they are now. So it's really sort of thinking about things in a way that you can transform them. You can be proactive, you can interact more with what's going on with planning in the community, rather than just react when somebody brings you a question or an idea. And all of that really goes into, you know, do we think of zoning more as a control mechanism, or do we think of it as something that can really empower a community, you know, to go forward into the future, to adapt, to adjust, to protect things that we want to keep as we go into the future? Those are all things that a good zoning code can do at the same time. So overall, I know I kind of hit you with a whole bunch of zoning stuff all at once, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions, bring up the map again. Again, I want to be clear, that's not, you know, a done deal. That's not even necessarily what a finished product would look like. It's just trying to get an idea better of you know, what is going on in the community right now, to see it a little better without all those different districts. But that's my pitch. I hope that we say yes. We'll have so much fun and it'll be so cool.
Are there, okay, Councilmember Terrell?
RJ, will this save any time or money of the committees or something? Because maybe it's a little clearer, a little more clearly written.
Oh, I'd certainly like to think so. I know it'll save me some time day to day. There are quite a few, you know, the zoning hearing board alone, the fact that we haven't missed a month yet since I've been here. You know, if you're having variances that are so commonly requested, for example, the non-conforming structures amendment, that's, you know, sort of an easy alley-oop to fix some of those issues. But, you know, there still remain a lot of people that want to do a little more, you know, have a little more flexibility on their property, or, you know, signs. That's a whole other section of zoning entirely, you know. If a code is working well in the current year, you're not going to see that many variance requests. And that's definitely a significant time investment for me and the staff members in my department. You know, not to mention some of the really common modification questions that we get at council. Again, you know, if there's things that everyone kind of agrees make sense, as long as the engineering is there to back up the design, why go through the process in the first place? You know, we can update it for some things that are a little more commonly accepted or, you know, technically sound, without having to go through a separate review process that takes time and resources.
So you use very big, passionate words. Is this really cleaning it up, or are you like throwing it out and doing it again?
Well, I mean, it's definitely closer to the second one. I think there are some things that can carry forward pretty comfortably. You know, the vast majority of the town is this R2 zoning district, which there are only a couple places that I saw on the map that really had enough meaningful difference to even be an R1 versus an R2 district, which is usually a density thing. Lower numbers are less dense. But so I think there are a couple little issues to clean up in the R2 in the single family code, because those are where we get some of those really consistent residential variance requests. But when it comes to the commercial stuff, we may keep a lot of the uses or a lot of the work that we've done on things like the kennel question that came up recently, or for example, this oil and gas ordinance update. There may be some things that change about districts or locations, but overall, those things are going to stick. I think it's more about sort of condensing. We have about 18 zoning districts right now on sort of that hypothetical thinking it through map. That's down to, I think, 8 or 9. And I just don't see a whole lot of difference between some of the things you can do in C7 versus C2 or C8 or, you know, I would say I think of it as a facelift or a reboot. You know, we're a little beyond a Band-Aid.
I think my final question is, how do we make sure there aren't any winners and losers?
That's a really good question. Well, first off, part of this whole process to solicit a planning firm is they should really be doing a lot of heavy lifting with community and stakeholder engagement. A process like this shouldn't be done without talking to the business community, without talking to residents in different types of housing, you know, whether it's apartments, townhomes, single family, you know, senior housing, all that good stuff. I think we're really well positioned to have some great community engagement within the McCandless and Me site. And also, you know, some residents that may have participated in the comp plan drafting. This is kind of like a comp plan for your zoning ordinance, right? So it's you do that ground level work to figure out what are really important values to the community, and then you get it across the finish line by updating things like your zoning. So I think overall, there's very little that somebody could do right now that they couldn't do. Some of those, you know, trickier commercial uses aside, which may certainly change. Same thing with the parks. You know, right now they're being used as park and green space, but we don't really have another bucket to put them other than this existing institutional district, in which you can do all kinds of things like put a nursing home, personal care home, you know, big school. Those are probably all things that we don't necessarily want to be put in place of our parks either right now, but they're all lumped into the same district. So a good update of this is going to have a ton of engagement and a ton of opportunity for people to be heard, so that hopefully there aren't any losers and it's just a win-win.
How do we protect a landowner, though, that maybe isn't part of the community process, that is not, trying to create this vision that one day they wake up and then they can't, we've changed the use of their land and it affected the value?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I mean, I can't speak for the whole process, because certainly just my ideas are not enough to make this come together. But our our zoning districts are already really, really siloed. Like, there's a lot of property, commercial property, particularly in the community, that you can only do a couple things with. And there are a lot of uses that a property owner, to do something that probably nobody would really find particularly objectionable in the neighborhood, if at all, that they'd have to go through a rezoning to do. For example, churches, those are only in the institutional district. That's something that you kind of think of as more of like a sort of a residential community use. But a property owner that would want to open a church right now, if they were on, say, a neighborhood corner intersection, would have to go through a rezoning, which is not cheap and takes time. And I think that when you're looking at condensing all of the, I'm staring off at my giant zoning map over here. So I think that when you're looking at condensing commercial uses, it's very unlikely that you're going to be taking anything off the board. We've been pretty aggressive over the years in zoning against things that concerned us. I think more likely than anything, this is going to open up a lot of options to property owners to do uses that are of similar intensity to where they're already located on, in a highway or in a more built up commercial area. It's just going to streamline things and probably reduce rezonings to end up doing similar things with the property, or things that you couldn't do before because we didn't know they existed in 1978.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Tricia had her hand up.
Did, and thank you. You kind of touched on this a little bit, because that was my immediate concern, was how the input from residents and local businesses would be solicited. I think nothing can move forward without really active engagement from our community. I do agree that we need updates. I've had confused discussions trying to figure out things and answer people in terms of real estate and things like that with this town. But I know when the comprehensive plan was introduced, there was a suggestion in it about rezoning a part of Route 19 between CCAC and Cumberland. And there was real concern from the residents of that corridor there of the change. And I'm not sure if those residents, I'm sure they were invited to be part of the comprehensive plan, but it kind of fell on them and they didn't hear about it until it was already in print. So I just want to make sure that the engagement occurs before something like that.
Right. I mean, this process is something that's probably going to take 1.5 years, just a ballpark average, because it is a really significant lift. You really have to look at every property, but at the same time, I did take a look at the comp plan recommendations and discussion about that. In that sort of just thinking out loud map, that area is unchanged. All that I did with that map was turn the commercial areas that already exist different colors, so that we can see, a little better what's already going on there, what's like to like. And again, I'm only one person, and I'm sure there's going to be a ton of community and stakeholder input, as well as some good advice from whatever professional firm we contract with. But I don't see any areas that are residential no longer being residential from this process. Those are already kind of set. Part of being a built out community is the fact that, well, you're built out, kind of what's there in each spot is, well, that's where the chips fell already. This is really my hope at least is that out of this process, we mostly give a vehicle for residents to use their property a little more comfortably without sort of this cumbersome variance process, or to provide opportunities to work more directly in public-private partnerships to bring some really neat things to town when there's an opportunity.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Councilmember Smith?
RJ, two quick questions. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, at least part of what this will do is simplify the zoning code and loosen restrictions by kind of this reduction in subdivided, I think you said there's 19 zones right now, and it would potentially go down to like 10, something like that. Is that something where that could almost be one of the directives for the firm? To say, like Mike was saying earlier, we want to make sure we're not taking anything away from somebody. So when you're going through this, the goal here is to do this, to make it simpler and to loosen restrictions, not have, like Mike said, winners and losers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't, are you still, I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I'm done with that. I have
Yeah.
a second question, but I'm done with that one.
Okay. I'll circle back to question number 2, because knowing me, I'll forget the question while I'm giving the answer to number 1. So yeah, anytime you contract with planning or design firm to do something like this, it's completely community driven, whether it's, helmed by a steering committee or council, or, heavy community engagement, or a combination of all of those things. I'm certainly going to be extremely involved. And I think you summed up pretty well what my belief is the goals of this should be, which is to simplify the zoning districts, to account for the fact that there may be uses or modern things that pop up that, again, are not any more intense. It's what's going on in those areas right now, but just aren't accounted for in the zoning code in a way that we sometimes say no, or the lift is too heavy for developers to do something exciting. So, loosening restrictions, yes, perhaps, but as long as no one, gets the message that, a gas station is going to get to move right into your cul-de-sac. That is not the kind of loosening that we want to do.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the flexibility word is what's really key there. It's something that people value a ton, especially after the last year. And, goodness willing, we never have another pandemic in our lifetimes, but you never know what's around the corner. And hopefully we will end up with, in working with a firm, a main directive can be, let's try and future-proof the code as much as we can.
Okay. And then the second question is, I mean, at least in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, there would almost be 2 parts of this, right? There would be the actual rezoning, the new map with whatever the districts are, and coming up with that plan and, defining those districts. And then it seems to me that there would be a second part, which would be, the lawyers coming in, you dastardly lawyers, having to come in and make the language work, so, okay, you have these restrictions now, and you pretty much want to pass these forward. So, but here's what we have to do because this is what's changing. So first, is that understanding correct? That it would kind of be, there's kind of these 2 halves to this?
Yeah. So, sorry, I apparently was too enthusiastic and got blowback from someone's microphone, but yes. So it can vary firm by firm. I'm not sure necessarily that I would prefer one over the other, but some firms will have legal counsel right on hand. But that's not the be all end all, because, a planning firm may not necessarily be from Pennsylvania. And so, where there are things that are overly pretty similar in planning and design, there may be little particulars of Pennsylvania zoning law that I would imagine we would be bringing in, our town attorney's office to work in tandem with them to make sure that the final ordinance is, correctly formatted and also legal in Pennsylvania zoning.
Okay. And so that would kind of be that wouldn't be part of this request of what we're like. That would kind of be further down the road, just keeping it in mind as kind of an additional cost item that there'll have to be some kind of, you know, Pennsylvania legal review kind of.
Yeah, I would say that compared to the overall cost of contracting a planning firm, about half of which, I'm ballparking anyway, was in the budget request for this year and then would be continued forward into next year, presumably. You know, Mr. Corbel, feel free to chime in here if you have any thoughts, but I would say that overall the cost of our legal counsel doing sort of the back end review to make sure that everything's okay before it's adopted is not going to be the bulk of the total cost of this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It'll mostly go to the planners.
Okay.
If they do a good job, you know, there won't be a whole lot for us to do other than to make sure it meets legal muster. It makes sense read together as a whole. And so I agree with RJ. The lion's share of the cost will go towards the planning aspect of this versus the legal aspect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
RJ, I did have a question about something that you said about pulling the parks out of the institutional. What can you elaborate a little bit just on your thoughts about how that should go?
Sure, yeah. So the institutional district is an interesting creation. I'm sure that at the time it served the goal that they were, you know, pursuing. But again, you know, just over the years, things change. And especially since we've been having this whole discussion about uses that require open space and how little of that there is around town. You know, part of the challenge is that there's only one district that we have for any sort of civic use, and it's the institutional district. So sometimes you'll see parks in either a special conservancy district or a recreation with amenities district, which would probably be most similar to, you know, sort of what we would be looking at potentially. But there's also issues of, you know, again, hospitals, personal care homes, nursing homes. Those are all contained in the institutional district, but they're really sort of a mixed use or almost more of a commercial construction leaning use. And so you can commonly see those in different types of commercial or transitional districts, as I'll call them, which is just, you know, sort of the area that's the fuzzy in between of the neighborhoods and the hard commercial. Churches, again, you know, that's something that you might see as a conditional use in a residential district, but it's not. You have to rezone a property to open a school, church, or library. So I kind of think of parks and open space and these other civic uses as sort of two different things that, you know, they're connected often in who owns the property or the user of the property, you know, people that come to experience the amenities. But you're not really trying to do the same thing on them, because one type, parks and open space, generally you're trying to keep open. And these other types of civic uses are essentially development, you know, of one type or another. And so I think it would make a huge amount of sense. And I think that the process will bear out, you know, that my hunch is correct, that we would benefit most from splitting the parks off into some sort of, you know, recreation with amenities district, and either placing those other civic uses into mixed use or commercial districts going forward.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other comments or questions by council members? Okay, Councilmember Sponholz, since Mike's already had one crack, let's let you go.
No, mine's just a comment, and it only represents my personal belief. And I think you guys have heard me on a number of occasions say that I believe that our zoning ordinances were badly in need of updating. So I just want to say I really support moving forward with the first steps of issuing an RFP. I think that as things have changed over these years, that my experience in working with our code has been that we've created new language to try to to try to modify along with changing times. We've amended it. In so doing, we have also created contradictions and inconsistencies. I totally agree with RJ that we're not at a total rewrite because some really good work has been done along the way, but a lot of work needs to be done. I also support Councilmember Cloonan's comment that it's absolutely imperative that we have community stakeholder involvement. And as for myself, and maybe this is as a former member of the EAC and the current liaison, I would at least hope and urge for whatever firm we might hire in the future, if approved, that we seriously look at creating a new zoning district, something like RJ described, a recreation and amenities district, to get North Park out of the institutional, as well as to give a home, a protected home, to all of the parks and recreation facilities that we have within our town boundaries as well. So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
I completely agree with that whole statement. Thank you, Councilmember Sponholz. Mike, you had another question?
I assume we're gonna vote on something. We're just doing it to authorize the request for proposals to come in, right?
That's what we're doing. We don't really have to do a vote. We can do a nod.
Okay.
To just give her permission to solicit those RFPs, and then we'll review those and go from there. So this was her presentation of what this would look like globally, and but we'll of course know more once we get RFPs. So that's what this is about tonight. So but we're not authorizing any work, and we're just seeing what we're getting into. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, well done, RJ. All right, so let's so what do you think? Would this just merits a head nod, unless you just want to raise your hand to make it a little easier, if you want to nod a long time so I can look at everybody, or shake. So okay, all right, what do we got here? Yes, move forward with RFP. Okay, RJ is going to be smiling for a week. This is something.
Oh, I am.
She's one of the things Bob used to entice her to come to McCandless, and
It's true.
it is. So good. All right, well done. Okay, I think that's everything on in zoning. Let's public safety.
Okay, now we have the chief's report. Ryan, are you on?
Sorry, let me find him in the audience. 1 second.
Does anyone have
Hello.
questions?
Good evening, folks. Anyone have any questions for me?
So, Chief Hawk, I do have a quick
Yes.
question.
Yes, sir.
The officer initiated public service. Can you just describe what that is? It sounds really good. And I want you to toot your own horn, I guess, if it is really good. Hopefully it's good and it's not bad.
Well, that's kind of a catch-all for any time the officers might try to interact, whether it's helping a stranded motorist or give someone directions. It's kind of a catch-all for any interaction that the officers have with the public that doesn't really fit the other categories. I think whenever we do park and walks and such, they're listed under the schools here. Those have been down significantly, obviously, because of COVID, but that officer initiated, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's anything the officers do that where they are interacting with the public, they took the initiative or assisted the public in some way that just doesn't fit one of the basic categories.
Excellent. It just was a pretty big category, and looks like they're doing an excellent job with it. So.
Well, and I appreciate that, sir. I would say this is, the vaccination gets out there and maybe things hopefully open back up. We fully intend to hit the ground running, so to speak, and be out there, among them in the community and the the business district as well. So hopefully that number will climb whenever COVID, releases its grip a little bit.
All right, thank you.
If anyone else has any other questions, I'll field them. If not, I was going to maybe bring to your attention a couple things. You folks probably know I like to recognize when the officers do something like saving a life. And as you can see in the report, January 21st was a good day in that regard. Officer Cavalier assisted a neighbor and brought back an elderly female with CPR. But upon the medic's arrival, they had brought her back to consciousness. So I like to call the officers out whenever they do something like that. And we had another one in January. I did throw several items at you folks in this month's meeting. I feel like I might have overloaded you a bit, but I also wanted to mention our canine received a bullet and stab protective vest in January. And I would like to recognize some, wonderful residents over on Lake Marshall Drive in the town. They raised the funds and got Joy a new bullet and stab protective vest. I could go over a few other things, but one thing I would probably be remiss if I didn't mention, and for any of you folks who may have ever met him, we did lose one of our finest on January 21st, a retired officer, Gary Lunds. As you folks can see, I led my report with that. He served the town of McCandless Police Department from 1992 through early 2013. Gary is what I would say, he's the embodiment of a good community-minded street cop. He was extremely personally invested in this community, and in particular, those that were less fortunate. He was a kind, compassionate, and professional officer. And one thing that, hopefully the other officers recognized as I did early on, he was always the last officer to come in at the end of the night. He made sure all the other officers were in safely, and then he would end his tour duty. He exercised common sense and discretion in all of his interactions with the public. He had a huge heart. He was tremendously generous, but he would never speak of all of his good deeds. So I would end with rest in peace, Gary. I am honored to have served with you.
Many thanks to him and his family, and condolences.
Thank you, sir.
Ryan,
Anyone have any questions?
Mike had a question.
Ryan, has
Yes,
the police force got their first vaccine yet?
Thank you for that question, Mike. Yes, in fact, probably about 2/3 of the agency right now are taking that vaccination, and I believe the second round is on board with everyone as we speak. This from probably about Wednesday through today. In fact, a lot of the officers received their second vaccination.
Are we requiring them all to get it?
Not at this time. We are not. I believe in speaking with Bob, we have kind of remained in that position where, and I think we've kicked the tires, so to speak, on the options the town might have. But at this time, it is not a requirement. It is optional.
Any other questions, comments? Nope. Okay, this closes the report for public safety.
Public Works.
Madam President, we have 2 items for Public Works today. The first is the Public Works Activity Report, which was included in your packets. If anybody has any questions, Mr. Sabina is here with us. If there are no questions, the second item, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Grimm to take care of.
Thank you, Ms. Woods. I wanted to do 2 things. We'll more formally acknowledge Mark and his service at the next meeting, but we have been going through a very extensive search to replace Mark when he retires at the end of the month. We started back in August. We received 30 resumes, interviewed 14 candidates over that time. And at the end of the day, literally just look down the hall to find the new person who will take over. That person is Jeff Shaneman, our code enforcement officer currently. Jeff has a terrific background, a good combination of administrative, financial, budgetary experience, technical knowledge, and management background. He's worked with multi-million-dollar operating and capital budgets. He has capital planning experience, implementing a number of different plans, preparing plans, specifications, and bidding documents, and had the added advantage of managing some union crews in his past. Jeff is here with us, and I just wanted to introduce him to those of you who may not know him. He'll be hard to replace as a code officer, but I'm looking forward to working with him in his new role as a public works superintendent. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Just congratulations.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Okay. Thank you. That completes this part of the report.
Services Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. I have two, I guess we'd call them announcements. As you know, because of COVID and budgetary considerations, the firefighter physicals had been deferred last year. So I just wanted to let you know that plans are underway to try to schedule and move forward with that. I'm sure Fire Marshal staff will keep us informed how and when that proceeds. And secondarily, I would just like to remind all of council that on February 23rd from 6 to 10 p.m. at Beatty Tech, the presentation for all of the volunteer fire departments, as well as our staff, is strategic planning for fire services operations, taught by Jerry Ozog, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. Fire Marshal Stack had earlier sent an email, I believe, to all council, inviting them to attend. So certainly, if you're available, I would urge you to do so, and more to come. But Bob and Dan are investigating whether or not there is a way to video this meeting for future viewing or even potentially live, but certainly we'll share that with you if that occurs. And as far as the reporting, the Fire Marshal's report for the month of December and permit report for January 2021 were in your packet, as well as the code enforcement's violation complaint statistics report for the month of January. Is there any questions or comments from anyone?
I would like to know if it was perhaps an error that there is a $600,000 in-ground pool going in on Grubbs.
I believe that would be Mr. Shoneman.
Are we speaking about particularly a building permit? Is that what we're asking about?
Yeah, it's under permits. I thought it might mess up our totals if it did say a $600,000 in-ground pool. That seems a little high to me.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. I'm sending Dan Stack a microphone request, but that might be more the building inspector's wheelhouse, which is Jeff Frazier, who is not here.
That's okay.
However, if Dan doesn't know, I'll double check.
Yeah, just have them look at that, because we keep all those totals of all those improvements.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, that seems quite high.
Yeah, it does. It seems, yeah.
It does seem high. However, some of these elaborate pools and the amount of accessories that go with these pools, it could be possible. But we will certainly check and let you know on that.
Okay.
With the waterfalls and the little outbuildings and all that kind of stuff, it could.
Okay. Well, I'll be impressed to to know about that pool.
We'll get you an invite. How's that?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, you know what? I actually just got a message from Jeff Shaneman, who helps out with has helped out with building inspection prior to Bob taking him from me. But he said that it's correct. There is indeed a house on Grubbs Road that has a very fancy pool going in.
All right, good. I thought maybe we put too many zeros in there, but I must be mistaken.
At least I will update you if I have misunderstood his text, but it seems that that's real.
Okay, great.
Any other questions or comments? Then that closes the Service Committee report.
Recreation Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. Just wanted to first start with a couple of reminders. Some activities that the Activities Advisory Committee are going to be posting include, take a look on our website or our Facebook page at our kindness calendar. We also have a virtual Valentine's party and some activities coming in March as well. And I just want to remind everyone to please take a look and see if there are any of these type of activities that you can participate in. Most are virtual at this time, and the Activities Committee is looking forward to getting together in person. The second thing we ask for tonight is we have been given the resignation of Jennifer Shuckrow from the Activities Advisory Committee. I'd like to personally thank Jennifer for the work she's done so far. Always willing to take on a project, but she has accepted a different employment opportunity. So we will be, we just need to, I guess, do we need a vote to accept?
Tricia, would you like to make the motion for that?
Okay. So at this time, I'd like to make a motion to accept the resignation of Jennifer Shuckrow from the Activities Advisory Committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Councilmember Schwager. We do appreciate the hard work. We do appreciate the hard work of the citizens on all of these boards. And are we okay? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
And we thank her for her service. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the resignation indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, and we will get that position posted on our social media sites, hopefully as early as tomorrow.
And are there any other questions about recreation from council at this time or comments? That concludes the recreation report.
All right, thank you. We are moving on to old business, and we have our first item of business is to have further discussion, if necessary, on the identified ordinance of 1510, amending and updating the town's oil and gas drilling regulations, and then a possible motion to accept. But let's start out with, are there comments or questions from council members about this? Yes, Councilmember Woods.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, this has been in the works for a very long time. I don't think it's perfect, as Mrs. Love mentioned earlier, but I think it's pretty good. And I did just want to mention that I thought we got some really great feedback at the public hearing 2 weeks ago. And one item in particular that came via email from a resident I wanted to mention, and that was about during a public hearing for a conditional use situation. It was talking about allowing people from outside of McCandless to speak in that situation. And that's something I think is a great idea. I don't know whether it needs to be included in this ordinance or if it's something that we could change on a broader scale so that it all conditional use hearings, people from outside of McCandless would be allowed to speak. And the reason for that would be, for instance, at present, there is no unconditional natural gas development in McCandless, which means that necessarily no resident in McCandless can speak to the effects of what it's like to live next door to that sort of development. So in those situations, and the courts have held that that is a reasonable thing to do, as long as it's the same company doing the drilling, to have someone from outside of your community be able to speak to the effects of what it's like to live there. So that's something I'd like us to consider. If not for this ordinance, I don't want to hold it up any more than necessary, then to apply toward just changing how we handle conditional use hearings.
Are there any other comments?
Madam President,
Yes, Councilmember Smith.
a couple comments. One is just that, right now, what this is proposing is, more, there's nothing that addresses this use right now, and there's no way to really ban a use. And so what this ordinance is doing is we're being proactive and putting in some of these protections that that don't exist right now. And I'll agree with Councilmember Woods and some of the public comments that it's not perfect, but I think it is pretty good, and a lot of work went into it. The only other comment I have is that I do still have a problem with those paragraphs at pages 21 to 22. I think it's subparagraph Z, and then it's 1, 3, and 5, particularly 3 and 5. Z3 and Z5, with the requirement to test for noise at the closer of the property line or 100 feet from a protected structure, is potentially setting up an impossibility situation for a operator to perform, because there's no provision for what happens if the landowner where the protected structure is refuses to give permission for the operator to go there. Both of those things could be solved by saying, if the landowner doesn't grant permission, then it can be done at the property line. I'm just not comfortable having a provision where I can see on the face of it the potential for an impossibility to meet the requirement, because I think that's just asking for a lawsuit if it ever comes up, and that's just unnecessary legal fees.
I am pulling the. Ooh, sorry for that feedback.
And that is RJ, is that your understanding of that statement, of that
Yeah.
section?
I'll pull it up now to really double check, but as far as I understood it, it was there's a provision in there for any of the noise testing or the benchmarking of what the noise level was prior to any sort of development, that you assume a default ambient noise level, which is the term that's in there, of 55 decibels, which I don't have enough expertise in decibels and noise to say exactly what that sounds like, but I do recall last year when we were looking at a lot of other ordinances that was a very common figure that I saw in other ordinances. So, to let somebody onto your property to establish a baseline noise level is really something that theoretically should be benefiting the property owner if they have a complaint down the road. So
well,
I think
that's paragraph 1, which is the one that I could get away with because of that. But then when you go to paragraphs 3 and 4, it's if there's a complaint about the noise generated during construction, it's required to go onto the property if there's a protected structure. And then paragraph 5 is once it's up and running, I think it's once it's up and running, if there's a complaint, then it requires testing from 100 feet. So it's not so much subparagraph 1. On subparagraph 1, you're right. There's a backdoor to have a baseline that's established. But in subparagraphs 3 and 5, there's not that same backdoor, because you can't, the same backdoor wouldn't apply, but there's not any backdoor to say, okay, if the landowner doesn't let you on, here's what you have to do.
But the landowner is the one making the complaint. If the landowner is the one making the complaint, why would they not let you on to test for noise?
because they know the operator can't meet the statute. They can make the complaint and then say, I'm not going to let you onto the property, and then the operator's stuck. And I mean, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
They can't prove a violation then. There's no proof of violation.
Well,
The only way
but the
you-
way the statute reads, we're requiring the operator to do these tests. And if the landowner doesn't say, sure, come onto my property, then the operator can't conduct the tests, and we can say, you never conducted the test. And they're going to say, but that's because the landowner didn't let us on. So, I'm raising the legal issue, and maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Steve, if somebody makes a complaint and then you go to see about the complaint and they don't let you on the property to see if the complaint actually exists, is that a complaint?
I don't know what it is, but it's certainly not allowing us to follow through with the provision here. I mean, if you're bringing the operator in after the complaint and they're unable to test it, then there's nothing to talk about.
That's right.
I know the ordinance says that they have to do the testing, but if it's impossible because the complainant won't permit them, I don't think that's a good reason to either shut down the operation or require them to modify the operation, because we would have no data
There's
to do so. Yeah. So I hear the impossibility issue there, but I don't think in reality there's much that we can do at that point. I think we would just let it go on. You could.
I mean, I think we would have to, yeah, and
yeah, I don't.
So from my perspective, if we say in that situation, do the testing at the property line, then we're better protected, the town, because the town can then say, okay, the property owner's not letting you on, but you still have to do the testing at the property line. Otherwise, we're stuck in a position where we say, okay, we can't do anything until the landowner lets them on.
Yeah, that's true, but I think that works though. I really do.
Okay.
I think you are right though. If we would try to enforce something or stop the operation without following through on the testing, then we would have no grounds. And if we did do that, then sure, the operator might have grounds to sue the town. But I mean, if I'm sitting in this chair advising RJ or Bob on that, I would not tell them to enforce that at that point.
Right.
The way I'm reading this gives the operator the ability to do the testing at the property line. So they could be on their own property line.
Well, that's in a
I see that,
situation
yeah.
where the properties would abut, and that there could be an argument that there could be property in between, right?
Okay.
So then it would be closer to the.
Okay, that's a good
You
point.
know what I mean? So I think it's written in a way that would, you're trying to find out if at the source of the complaint, the noise is too loud. That's the point here.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, as long as everyone realizes that in that situation, this is essentially unenforceable, which I'm not that concerned about because I just don't see drilling coming down the line. But, but it's just as long as we realize those provisions, if that scenario arises, are unenforceable. Essentially, in practice, they're unenforceable.
I do agree with President Zachary that I would find it very odd for someone to complain about the noise and then not allow it to be tested. If that's really what they're aiming for, is to have that remedied if it is indeed too loud. So
you have a much more positive view of people than I do for a lawyer.
But if they do what you say, then we're not going to do anything with it anyway, and it's just going to continue. So
yeah.
Any more comments, Councilmember Smith? Are you done? You usually have two.
Nope, I narrowed it down to that one.
Okay.
There's still a lot of technical stuff and specific numbers that I wish I understood better, but I'm going to defer to RJ and Bob and everybody else who put this together on that.
It has been a very long process with a lot of hard work from a lot of people. It's almost
Yes.
2 years that we've been working on this ordinance.
Yes.
I'm a little personally vested in it because, you know, I've worked on it with a lot of people myself. And I have to say, I think the safeties that are put in this to protect the land and the water and the air and the citizens are, I can't even think of anything else to put in it. I mean, we've really, really worked hard. I think it went from a 5-page ordinance to 27-page ordinance. So there's a lot, thank you, RJ. So there's a lot in there. I do think it's good. It is not perfect, but I think it is very good. And I think if we can, the only thing I see people unhappy about with this is that that institutional has our parks in it. And I think just everybody does not want to see a fracking well in our parks, right? Does anybody want to see a fracking well in our parks? No, we don't want that.
I'd have to see the dollar numbers involved first. So
yeah,
I would say probably, but I'm not going to say categorically no, because
yeah,
I know how much revenue those generate.
I'd reconsider running for election then. But so I like I said, I do think we value our green spaces, and I think we value our park. And that's one of the things that I think is really going to help us out with this changing our zoning map, is we can get the parks out of the institutional zoning and take care of that. So I know a lot of people were concerned, you know, about what about the county, you know, this county's land, you know, what are they gonna, what kind of craziness could they get into down there? And Bob, with Steve's suggestion, reached out to the county executor's office, and we did get a comment back from Amy Downs, who's the director of communication for Allegheny County. And she says, I quote, "We are not considering it," talking about drilling, fracking, which is what we inquired about, and wouldn't consider it. So I feel like this gives us a little bit of time to revamp our zoning, get things cleaned up a little bit, looking like how we want it to look, move forward with what we have here, and then get the rest of that cleaned up. So I do think we have, and since we have no potential companies knocking at our door, I feel good moving forward with what we have here. Those are my comments. Does anyone else have any? Okay. So is someone interested, or is there a motion to adopt ordinance 1510, amending and updating the town's oil and gas drilling regulations?
So moved.
I think I saw Councilmember Sponholz first on that. Can I give the second to you, Councilmember Woods?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Are there additional comments? One more bite at the apple, as everyone says. Okay. All right. Hearing none. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Congratulations, everyone who worked on this for so long. Lots of work.
All right. Excuse me. All right. Next, discussion on tentatively identified ordinance number 1511, an ordinance amending the town's zoning ordinance regarding non-conforming structures, and a possible motion. We talked about this last week, and are there any more questions about that? For RJ?
No.
She did add a little, she did add the commercial in there. See a little sneaky thing she put in there.
There
So-
are two options. So
Yeah, we have two
all get to
versions, right? It looks like there's two versions, one without the distinction and one with the distinction?
Yes, so the default one that was uploaded, what was the one that was most similar to the advertisement? It just flipped around a couple letters. That was part of the Planning Commission's recommendation, but of course, we advertise before we send it down. So if council were to choose the residential only version, that default option is what it would look like. If council were to discuss and choose to add commercial structures, then the alternative document is what it would look like.
Okay, I'm sorry, RJ, but I didn't quite understand. So I was relying upon my former version. So I'm not, and I don't have a second computer up here.
What you've got is essentially the same. The Planning Commission just asked me to add the definition to non-conforming structures, what a non-conforming structure is, back, which was similar to, I think, one of the public comments that we got on that as well. So that's back in there, word for word, what it was in the original, which I think is still a perfectly fine definition. And then I think the rest of the language is still totally the same, except the Planning Commission asked that if it was residential only, that there was a breakout for residential and a breakout for non-residential. So I added those to this final draft version. The alternate just takes out any of the distinction between non-residential and residential and leaves everything else exactly the same. So it would basically apply to all property in town.
It's on the SharePoint. Can you pull that up next to, can you pull up like multi-screens and pull that up next to it so you can take a look at it? Are there any other questions while Shelley's looking at that?
I would just say that I know I said it in the public hearing, but thinking about it more and more, it has swung me more strongly to eliminating the distinction. Because really it comes into play when something is damaged or destroyed. And whether you're a small business or a large business, I just don't think something like that should require you to go through a zoning process for a pre-existing variation that was already there. You know, if whatever happened that damaged or destroyed your building didn't happen, you wouldn't have to go through that. And so, you know, I don't see why we would want to compound the issue for whoever that happened to. So that's my position.
Can I ask a clarifying? Oh, sorry. We all started talking.
Councilmember Woods, did you have a question?
Yes, RJ, is that how it would work?
Yeah, so that was the question that I was basically going to ask. Was there two parts to the amendment? One is to allow people to extend existing non-conforming building lines. So say if you have to be 15 feet from your neighbor's side lot line, but your house is 14 feet, you could make it go back further at 14 feet instead of needing that 1 foot variance. That would be under the default draft. That would only apply to residential structures. It was just sort of the mildest change that could be proposed. However, since Councilmember Smith was mostly talking about, at least right now, about the destroyed and rebuild aspect, that's sort of part two, in which you can, if your house, whatever, is totally destroyed, you could rebuild using that same non-conforming footprint, which again, right now you can't without a variance. So if we're looking to not differentiate anymore, is the focus just on that destroy and rebuild, or is the focus on extending an existing building line without any destruction?
Councilmember Clunan.
My preference would be to keep this to residential structures only at this time. When I'm considering the scenario that Councilman Smith said about a possible fire and the burden placed on our small businesses in our community, I think that if a plan was presented by that small business to zoning, that there would be compassion and reasonable judgment on approving something. I think most of the times that this ordinance was presented as an option because so often it's not due to fire or destruction of any kind. It's a matter of extending a deck or putting on an addition in the back of someone's home. And I think any kind of changes that a business would do in that similar regard, we would want to approve as a council and have go through planning and zoning as well.
So I have a procedural question. I know I'm way back here. I'm looking through my old agendas. Did we have a public hearing on this?
Yes.
So if this was, I don't recall the ordinance that we were discussing. I don't require it having the commercial part of it during the public hearing, did it?
No, you're correct.
Okay, so we can't, we would have to have a public, by our own rules, we can't really vote on this because we didn't have a public hearing on it, right?
Potentially. So with zoning ordinances, and I'd probably defer to the town attorney's opinion as to whether it would qualify or not. What the county typically asks is if you are amending the final draft from the public hearing version to, final adoption, if you're amending it so that it would include new property not previously affected by the draft that you originally sent to them, then they like to see it again. And then the state planning code re-triggers another public hearing. So potentially, if you want to move forward with that commercial inclusion, they might require it.
My view is that if we're going to include the commercial, it's a material change. And
Agreed.
rather than risk any issue, we should
Agreed.
send it back to the county
Agreed.
and have another public hearing.
Agreed. The public needs to have voice in this. And so a possible motion associated with this, I think, should be off the table.
Madam President,
Yes, Councilmember Sponholz.
so I'm just posing this question because I, for one, totally want this limited to residential. I stated my position on the night of the public hearing, and my reasons for not including commercial pretty much mirrored what Councilwoman Clunan indicated. So what is the problem with putting to, if there's a willing council member, which I would be, to make a motion to adopt the resolution as it was discussed in its form at the public meeting, that we could not move forward with a vote?
We absolutely could do that. There might be some council members who are on the fence about this and possibly would consider using the commercial property and would like to hear what commercial property owners have to say. So they might, and having heard that, or having heard this more extensively discussed, it could change their opinions. So I'm fine if someone wants to make that motion and the council members are ready to move forward on this for the residential area. But if there are council members who are like, no, I would like to consider this other thing and hear the public comment on that, then that's the part that I wouldn't be comfortable moving forward on. So if you would like to make a motion to just accept the residential, and then we get a second and we can vote for it absolutely right now, unless there's more discussion.
Madam President, can I ask you, Steve, a question?
Sure.
Steve, just procedurally, if we were to follow Councilmember Sponholz's line of thinking, and we were to adopt the ordinance as it was written for the public hearing, that included just the residential properties, and then went back to have a second amendment or another amendment to the ordinance for commercial, based on however we feel best about writing that. We're not really losing any time at all. In my mind, I think we're gaining, because we'll have the residential element in place and gain a benefit on the residential side while we're working on the commercial side.
Yes, you actually took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that if we did adopt this ordinance this evening, there's nothing that would prevent us from moving forward with the commercial changes in the alternate moving forward. And then at least we have these changes that are necessary that RJ has been seeking on the residential side of things.
Yeah,
So
I see
and
that as
RJ, I thought that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that this 50% damage non-residential language, that's what is currently existing in the code, right?
Yeah, I believe if it's anything that is, I'd have to double check if the wording changed at all. I think we wordsmithed it a little bit because the current code says something like, go ahead.
No, I agree. I think that the material issue that is of discussion here, that exists today. So we're not really losing anything by just sort of going through the process, moving forward for another. I would say this would be for Councilmember Smith. We're probably looking at no more than 3 months if it's on the fast track to have something fixed to allow for it to go through planning, to have public input, another hearing, advertise. You're talking 45 to 90 days max.
That sounds right to me. And also the only types of variance requests I've gotten that would fall under this so far have been residential. Now that doesn't mean that next month somebody couldn't come and ask for it, but it's the residential side's a little more constant compared to any commercial requests we might get that would fall under this.
It would help the residents if you made the change tonight.
All right, so those are all the options. Is there a motion? I guess I can just call for that.
So moved.
Okay. And this motion would be to, let's see if it says, it does say, it would be the non-conforming structures, doesn't stay on here, only residential non-conforming structures, but that's what the motion that you're making, Councilmember Sponholz?
That is correct. I'd like to help our residents to be able to simplify and expedite their simple requests, and I'd like to get it done tonight.
Okay, all right. Is there a second?
Okay.
All right, Councilmember Clunin. And remember, this is only non-conforming use of residential, just since there's been so much chatter back and forth to make sure everybody knows what we're voting on. Comments at this junction again, or questions about what we're doing or about this issue? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, new business. This would be a motion to adopt resolution number 2 of 2021, which would authorize the submission for a grant application for community infrastructure from the tourism fund for $250,000 for the Devlin Park tennis courts and the Lorraine Rogers playground. So this is merely a motion for us to apply for this grant. Is there a motion? Okay, Councilmember Woods, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Councilmember Smith. Any questions or anything about this, Bob? Is there anything you need to say about this at all? Sounds
No, I
like
think
a
this is
win-win.
pretty straightforward. These are items that we had budgeted in the 2021 budget. If we can get the funding, that'll help us out in the long run. It seems like a good fit, so we wanted to try to chase after this funding. We'll do our best.
Bob, our internal staff is just doing this application. There's no cost for consultants.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor for authorizing the submission for this grant indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, all right, somebody's getting busy on a grant. Is there any other new business? All right, Before I call for a motion to adjourn, I would like to announce to the public and also as a reminder to council that we will be having an executive session at the conclusion of this meeting to discuss litigation. There will not be any further business or reconvening of any public meeting tonight. So just wanted to make that announcement. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Clunin, Councilmember Smith for the second. All right. All those in favor of adjourning indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Or